500,000 men woke up every day with a single thought. These strong young men needed to eat a lot to defend the borders from misty Britain to the scorching sands of Syria. And each of them demanded his 3,000 calories every day. The Roman Empire had to feed this massive machine without the slightest interruption, for a hungry legionary is not just a disgruntled soldier, but a rebel ready to revolt. Imagine the scale of this incredible task today. Modern generals turn gray at the thought of supplying a single division overseas, spending billions and using satellites. Yet the Romans did this with 500,000 soldiers without radios, telephones, or engines. They built a supply system that ran like a Swiss watch, relying solely on the power of the wind, sails, carts, and muscle. How did they manage it? And why didn't the gigantic empire collapse under the weight of its own appetites in the very first years? Today we'll take a detailed look at how grain from Egypt made its way straight into a legionnaire's mess tin on the Rhine, traveling thousands of kilometers by land and sea. Ancient Rome's supply chain was far more complex than that of many modern corporations. Watch this video to the end to learn what ingenious and sometimes ruthless control methods the Romans used, and why their experience is still studied in military academies today. In the meantime, get comfortable, like this video, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new exciting historical investigations. Most ancient armies fought according to the simple principle of a locust swarm. They would arrive in new territory and simply devour everything around them. This worked perfectly if your military campaign lasted a couple of months in the summer. But Rome maintained a standing professional army year-round for decades on end. It was impossible to simply plunder the local population indefinitely without consequences. If you take all the food from the peasants, they will quickly die of starvation. And dead taxpayers bring absolutely no gold into the empire's treasury. Therefore, Roman logisticians had to come up with a completely new concept of warfare. They decided to feed the army centrally through an extremely complex supply chain. It sounds incredibly boring, but that is exactly what made Rome an invincible state. Think about the numbers the ancient quartermaster services had to deal with. 500,000 soldiers required about 750 tons of grain every single day. And that's not counting feed for tens of thousands of horses and pack mules. Annually, this staggering figure exceeded 270,000 tons of pure grain. And all this splendor had to be transported across mountains and stormy seas. A modern, massive truck can carry 20 tons of cargo in a single trip. Rome would have needed 13,000 such trucks every year for its army. But they didn't have big trucks with air conditioning and powerful diesel engines. They had creaky wooden carts and very stubborn donkeys on dirt roads. This forced ancient engineers to seek other unconventional ways to solve the logistical problem. The outcome of any major battle was decided long before the soldiers drew their swords. It was decided in quiet offices where literate officials calculated the balance of the future harvest. If logistics failed, the legion instantly turned into a mob of hungry, enraged rioters. A hungry, trained soldier was more terrifying than any Germanic barbarian wielding a battle axe. Roman emperors learned this simple rule very well at the cost of their own blood. The logistical food chain began thousands of kilometers from the cold northern borders. The rich provinces with warm climates became the base for feeding the massive army. The true heart of this agricultural system was the valley of the Great Nile River. There, the fertile soil yielded a bountiful harvest several times in a single growing season. Local farmers had no idea that they were literally feeding the lads in the snows of distant Britain. The food collection system was designed to operate with ruthless efficiency under any conditions. Taxes were collected not only in hard cash, but also in fresh produce. Every patch of fertile land was strictly accounted for in the imperial land registries. Special officials knew exactly how much choice wheat each specific Egyptian village would yield. Arguing with these people was extremely dangerous for the health and freedom of the local inhabitants. The military budget consumed an absolutely incredible share of the vast state's total revenue. About 70% of all the ancient empire's money went toward maintaining the army. Today, modern developed countries spend a paltry 3 or 4% on their defense. By Roman standards, modern states look like nothing more than a gathering of peaceful pacifists. The ancient Romans invested more in war than anyone else in known human history. This colossal sum was by no means spent on golden armor for the generals in the capital. The bulk of the allocated funds was absorbed by transportation costs and bulk purchases. Transporting a single sack of wheat overland doubled its price every 100 kilometers of the journey. It was a veritable gaping financial black hole in the ancient economic world. But the economy of the growing empire stoically withstood this colossal strain for many centuries. This entire system functioned seamlessly because it was based on rigorous mathematical calculation. None of the commanders relied on luck or military spoils during a distant campaign. Every offensive campaign was planned with the capacity of every warehouse along the anticipated route in mind. Generals first meticulously counted the wagons carrying food, and only then their armed soldiers. Offensive tactics were always completely subject to the strict dictates of the quartermaster's rear services. Egypt was not merely a rich province, but the Roman emperor's personal agricultural estate. The mighty Nile flooded every year, bringing incredibly fertile silt to the fields. This natural wonder made the local land the most productive in the entire Mediterranean world. Peasants worked hard from dawn to dusk, reaping truly colossal grain harvests. Their daily sweat literally turned into energy for the marching legions on the distant Rhine. None of the officials asked the locals if they wanted to share their harvest. The Roman military administration set strict quotas for grain deliveries to the state each season. Special, strict inspectors checked the quality of every shipment before it was sent to imperial warehouses. If the grain turned out to be damp or too dirty, the farmer faced very serious trouble. This food collection machine operated with the soulless precision of a well-oiled mechanism. The grain harvested by the peasants had to be quickly transported to major ports on the coast. For this purpose, thousands of river cargo barges were used, constantly plying the Nile. These spacious boats were the true heavy-duty trucks of the ancient river logistics network. They moved very slowly downstream to the vast city of Alexandria. There were massive state transshipment hubs for all of Egypt's grain. The Alexandrian warehouses amazed arriving merchants with their truly colossal dimensions. They consisted of entire city blocks of stone warehouses with heavy military guard. Inside, there was the strictest accounting of every clay amphora and every canvas sack. Scribes kept endless long lists using a complex system of double-entry bookkeeping. Your modern corporate accounting would have seemed quite familiar and understandable to them. But storing grain for long periods in the hot African climate was a real engineering challenge. Small pests, rodents, and the ever-present mold could destroy the supplies in a matter of weeks. Roman engineers built structures with a sophisticated ventilation system and raised floors. Fresh air constantly circulated between the rows of sacks, preventing the select wheat from becoming damp. Modern industrial grain elevators use exactly the same physical principle to preserve the harvest. From the port of Alexandria, the food had to cross the entire turbulent Mediterranean Sea. And here, suddenly, the most dangerous part of the entire long logistics route began. Ancient wooden ships were critically dependent on the whims of the wind and sudden violent storms. Fierce autumn storms regularly sent hundreds of tons of precious cargo straight to the ocean floor. The local fish got a hearty dinner, while the legionnaires remained completely hungry. To minimize these enormous risks, Rome created a colossal, state-run merchant fleet. These cargo ships were called corvettes and were true maritime behemoths of their time. A single such giant ship could easily carry up to 300 tons of valuable cargo. They were terribly slow and unwieldy, but incredibly spacious and very reliable. In essence, they were ancient oil tankers designed solely for transporting dry wheat. The captains of these important vessels received enormous sums of money and unprecedented privileges from the Roman state. The famous Emperor Claudius even insured their fragile cargoes at the expense of the Roman treasury. If a storm sank a ship, the owner would instantly receive full compensation for the value of the lost cargo. This sounds like modern expensive corporate insurance for large logistics companies. The Romans ingeniously devised this financial instrument to save their massive army from starvation. Sea transport was about 40 times cheaper than overland transport by cart. That is precisely why the cunning empire always sought to build its military bases near major navigable rivers. Ordinary water was the main logistical highway of the entire ancient civilized world. Hauling a sack of grain 1,000 kilometers by sea cost a pitiful, laughable pittance. That same sack on a cart was guaranteed to bankrupt the state treasury over the course of a couple of days of long travel. Ships usually sailed in tight, organized formations, protected by military triremes from brazen pirates. They arrived safely at Italian ports or set sail directly for the shores of distant Gaul. At the docks, an army of local laborers was already waiting, ready to empty the deep holds with incredible speed. Time was of the essence, after all, as each ship had to make several voyages during the navigation season. Thus, the maritime leg ended successfully, and the most difficult and exhausting overland leg began. As soon as the precious grain reached dry land, a real logistical nightmare began. Delivering supplies overland was an excruciatingly slow process and incredibly exhausting for everyone involved. The famous Roman roads were indeed renowned for their quality, but they did not defy the laws of physics. Animals pulling heavy carts needed to be fed daily during their long journeys, and this gave rise to a terrible paradox that literally baffled all ancient military logisticians. A team of strong oxen inevitably eats part of the very cargo it is laboriously hauling. After a couple of weeks of continuous travel, the hungry animals could eat all the food in the cart. It sounds like a pretty silly math problem from an elementary school textbook. But for the chief Roman quartermaster, it was a grave matter of life and death for the entire army. That is precisely why delivering supplies over extremely long distances by land was considered a completely pointless endeavor. Solving this logical problem required a truly ingenious engineering approach from the entire state. The Romans diligently built a dense network of special staging posts along all the main imperial roads. Every 30 kilometers, there was a fortified inn with huge stocks of fresh fodder. The oxen no longer had to carry heavy food for themselves all the way from the seaport. They happily ate hay harvested by local peasants right at this intermediate station. The average speed of such freight convoys was laughably slow by modern standards. A loaded cart drawn by lazy oxen covered about 15 kilometers in an entire daylight hour. That's even slower than a very tired person walking with a heavy backpack. On the other hand, such a distributed system was incredibly reliable and extremely predictable in terms of planning. The quartermaster always knew exactly on which specific day the convoy would arrive at the necessary military base. The roads were generously paved with sturdy stone, not for the sake of beauty or the comfort of casual travelers. The smooth, hard surface significantly reduced friction and protected the fragile wooden wheels of the heavy wagons. Every spring, an ordinary dirt road would instantly turn into an impassable, slippery, muddy swamp. A reliable stone highway allowed for uninterrupted supply of the army year-round in absolutely any foul weather. The military machines simply could not wait for the deep mud in the forests of Gaul to dry out. On the most difficult sections high in the mountains, heavy carts were always replaced by strong pack mules. These animals are incredibly resilient and can walk easily along the narrowest and most dangerous mountain trails. A single such animal could easily carry about 100 kilograms of cargo on its broad back. Caravans consisting of hundreds of mules stretched for many kilometers across steep mountain passes. From a bird's-eye view, it resembled an endless conveyor belt made up of living creatures. Every critical logistics link required strict armed protection from local, starving bandits. Experienced legionnaires regularly patrolled the supply routes, protecting valuable state cargo from attacks. The loss of just one large food convoy could easily derail an entire large-scale military operation. Attacks on imperial government wagons were always punished with the utmost severity and in a very public manner. Bandits were mercilessly crucified right along the main roads so that others would have absolutely no desire to steal. All this bustling land-based activity finally came to an end at the sturdy doors of the main military warehouses. These specialized buildings were a mandatory feature of every major camp along the border of the vast empire. They served as the final sorting station for millions of tons of first-class Egyptian wheat. From here, the food was distributed directly among the combat centuria in individual cohorts. And it was here that the true magic of the famous Roman inventory management and careful storage began. Managing such a massive flow of valuable cargo required a huge staff of competent, trained people. Hundreds of scribes meticulously filled out wax-sealed wooden tablets every day with reports on deliveries and remaining stock. They faithfully recorded the slightest shortages, spoiled goods, and animals that perished en route. Today, this process is handled by powerful cloud servers and smart inventory management software. But 2,000 years ago, ordinary people did this masterfully with the help of ink and incredible attention to detail. The most amazing thing about this whole story is that this slow system worked almost without major glitches. The enemies of invincible Rome often starved terribly in their own dense forests and endless steppes. Meanwhile, a simple Roman legionnaire, sitting in the mud at the very edge of the inhabited world, regularly received his rations. He knew for certain that behind him stood the incredible, unshakable, logistical might of the entire state. And this calm confidence made him deadly and unshakable in any bloody battle. The most important secret to the survival of the Roman legions was the horaea, or giant military stone warehouses. These were massive, elongated rectangular buildings with incredibly thick, fortified walls devoid of ornamentation. They were built to a single, strict architectural standard from Britain to the hottest parts of Syria. Engineers obsessively thought through every tiny detail to reliably protect supplies from destructive moisture. The main secret of long-term storage lay in the clever design of a raised floor, supported by small stone pillars. Dry air circulated freely beneath the floor, drying out even the slightest hint of dangerous dampness. The thick double walls functioned perfectly as a giant thermos, preserving a life-saving coolness during the hot summer. Narrow, elongated windows were positioned as high as possible near the roof to prevent drafts and theft. Even today, the temperature inside these ruins is noticeably several degrees cooler than the summer heat outside. In essence, these were true giant ancient refrigerators operating successfully without a single kilowatt of electricity. The scale of these utilitarian structures still genuinely shocks modern historians and archaeologists. A typical standard warehouse in a border military fort could hold enough food to sustain a full year of uninterrupted rations. This was done specifically in case of a sudden, prolonged siege or an unusually harsh, snowy winter in the region. Enemy armies could stand beneath the camp's sturdy walls for months, slowly dying of cold and hunger. Meanwhile, the Romans inside the walls calmly cooked hot porridge and comfortably awaited reinforcements from the capital. The vast interior of the granary was divided into strictly isolated stone compartments and cells. The grain brought in was never simply dumped into one huge pile on the dirty floor. If dangerous mold or voracious weevils suddenly appeared in one compartment, the problem was solved locally. That infected compartment could be isolated incredibly quickly, saving all the camp's other priceless supplies. Modern massive grain elevators use exactly the same ingenious principle of separate modular grain storage. The security level of these army granaries was on par with modern Swiss bank vaults. Only specially trained quartermasters had legal access to the interior, under the strict supervision of senior officers. Stealing food from a comrade's supply was considered one of the most heinous and shameful crimes in the Legion. For stealing another soldier's ration, a soldier could very easily lose his head without any lengthy trial. Harsh military discipline guaranteed the preservation of every calorie for future hard battles. But select grain was far from the only important guest in these dark, cool halls. The granaries carefully stored vast supplies of olive oil, salted meat, and cheap sour wine. The expensive oil was kept in giant, pot-bellied clay amphorae buried deep in the cold, dense earth. It served not only as cooking fat, but also as the main fuel for lighting all the dark rooms of the fort. In essence, it was both a grocery supermarket and the main supply station for an entire legion. To effectively protect against mice and rats, the Romans actively used a very real biological weapon. Military camps kept dozens of agile cats and specially trained snakes that hunted rodents. They roamed freely through all the warehouses and mercilessly destroyed any uninvited furry guests. This was the cheapest and most eco-friendly way to protect fragile state property from damage by pests. The cats received an unlimited supply of delicious food, and the mighty empire preserved thousands of tons of priceless wheat. Every batch of food received was required to be marked with special heavy lead seals bearing state seals. The seal clearly indicated the year of harvest, the place of collection, and the name of the official in charge of logistics. If food suddenly turned out to be rotten, the culprit was quickly found. even at the farthest edge of the vast empire. The strict quality control system worked flawlessly and never forgave fatal mistakes. The ancient, cunning quartermasters feared these small lead seals far more than whistling enemy arrows. When a combat legion set out on a long campaign, part of the supply depots turned into mobile transport convoys. Soldiers laboriously loaded supplies onto strong mules and formed a huge, endless baggage train behind the ranks. Each legion typically dragged along about 1,000 hardy pack animals with valuable food on their backs. This slowed the army down considerably on the march, but made it a completely self-sufficient, deadly killing machine. The commanding general could confidently set up camp in the open field without the slightest concern for the soldiers' sustenance. These massive stone warehouses quickly became the main symbol of the indestructibility of the Roman military presence in the region. The local barbarians saw these gigantic, guarded food supplies and fell into utter, hopeless despair. They understood perfectly well that the empire had come to their lands for good and would never leave of its own accord. Defeating a massive army that never goes hungry is practically impossible in the context of ancient warfare. And Roman military engineers understood this incredibly important fact better than any of the neighboring peoples. The daily diet of an ordinary Roman soldier was as far removed as possible from the lavish feasts of the capital's aristocracy. Their austere diet revolved around a single, essential, and incredibly reliable staple: common durum wheat. Every sturdy legionnaire consistently received just over a kilogram of unprocessed grain every single day of his service. This provided about 3,000 calories, essential for performing incredibly hard physical labor. While there was no gastronomic variety, the rations offered absolute energy efficiency and were very inexpensive. The grain was always issued whole and unground, directly in rough, sturdy leather field bags. And this was by no means a ridiculous mistake by lazy quartermasters, but an incredibly clever and well-thought-out logistical trick. Whole, dry grain can be stored for months without losing any of its nutritional value or normal taste. Ready-made flour, in the damp conditions of the campaign, quickly becomes damp, covered with dangerous mold, and irretrievably spoiled. Therefore, every cold evening, the exhausted soldiers were forced to turn into true professional, muscular millers. 8 men from a single combat unit took turns turning a heavy, hand-operated stone millstone for a long time. This round, solid stone weighed about 30 kilograms and constantly traveled with the unit on a mule. After an exhausting 30-kilometer daytime march, monotonously grinding grain was simply a punishment. From the hard-won flour, the soldiers quickly baked unleavened flatbreads right on the hot camp coals. Sometimes they would cook a very thick filling porridge for a long time, which they called pulse in soldier slang. They generously added salt, grated garlic, and absolutely any edible herbs found along the way. It tasted incredibly similar to a dense, wet piece of old, damp cardboard without any spices. But this sticky mass provided incredible energy to swing a heavy iron sword furiously in formation for hours on end. Regular meat was certainly present in the army ration, but played a purely secondary and supplementary role. Roman commanders quickly realized that soldiers on a high-meat diet lost their stamina much faster. Heavy pork or tough beef takes a very long time to digest, drawing much-needed blood away from already exhausted muscles. Complex carbohydrates from simple wheat work perfectly as a powerful, slow-burning fuel source inside the stomach. Modern marathon runners always load up on huge amounts of carbohydrates before a race using the same logic. Ancient legionnaires ate tasty meat mainly during the cold winter or after a very successful forest hunt. Most often it was heavily salted pork or incredibly tough, old smoked bacon from the supply wagon. It could sit in a soldier's backpack for weeks on end in any heat whatsoever without any terrible consequences. A piece of such stinky lard was simply tossed into a boiling pot of porridge solely to create a light richness. This added life-saving calories and at least some meat flavor to the utterly dreary, gray daily soldier's fare. To make up for vitamin deficiencies, cooks actively used hard cheese, pungent garlic, and cheap olive oil. Garlic was generally considered a truly sacred medicinal product throughout the vast army of ancient Rome. It not only greatly improved the taste of bland porridge, but also worked excellently as a mild natural antibiotic. Soldiers constantly chewed it to effectively prevent stomach ailments in the appalling, unsanitary field conditions. The smell in the cramped soldiers' barracks was simply indescribably thick, but the troops survived successfully and stayed healthy. The most interesting element of the basic soldier's ration was the famous strange drink called paska. It was a fizzy mixture of slightly stale water and incredibly cheap, sharp wine vinegar from the warehouses. The vinegar reliably killed all dangerous bacteria in the murky water, making it completely safe for mass consumption. Moreover, it perfectly quenched intense thirst under the scorching midday southern sun during a march. In essence, it was a genuine ancient sports energy drink, albeit with the strange taste of sour green salad. This meager diet seems unbearably boring and utterly tasteless to any spoiled modern person. But for a destitute ancient peasant, it was simply the most incredible gastronomic paradise on earth. Back home in the village, he often starved agonizingly during lean years, subsisting on bitter grass and dry roots. In the army, he was guaranteed huge, filling portions of food every single day without exception. The complete stability of his own stomach was the best motivator for incredibly loyal service to his distant emperor. Mealtime itself was a strictly communal process, and this incredibly strengthened their unbreakable brotherhood in arms. Soldiers in the same squad always ate from a single shared, piping hot cauldron every cold or hot evening. If anyone tried to be clever or, God forbid, poison the food, he suffered agonizingly along with all his comrades. Modest communal dinners by the campfire transformed 8 different strangers into a single, united, unbreakable family. And on the bloody battlefield, they fought desperately for one another until their very last ragged breath. All the carefully planned logistics did not end at the gates of the giant main military camp on the peaceful border. The most unpredictable and difficult part began when the army, with its supply trains, advanced into uncharted enemy territory. Delivering hot food to the long marching columns instantly turned into a deadly intense game. The slow supply trains stretched out monstrously for tens of kilometers, becoming incredibly easy prey for local partisans. The barbarians very often did not attack the tightly packed legions, but cunningly struck precisely at the vulnerable supply wagons. Experienced Roman generals fully understood the immense vulnerability of their incredibly stretched out lines of communication. Therefore, they ruthlessly forced soldiers to carry part of the heavy supplies right on their own hunchbacks. Every legionnaire was required to carry a mandatory ration pack sufficient for at least 3 full days of self-sufficient travel. Sometimes this mandatory supply was increased by order to a completely insane 20 days of full, heavy self-sufficiency. This added dozens of extra kilograms to their already incredibly heavy and cumbersome metal equipment. The exhausted soldiers sincerely hated this cruel practice and quietly cursed their commanders during the endless march. The famous commander, Gaius Marius, strictly forced the soldiers to carry food on special, uncomfortable, wooden crossbacks. Because of this innovation, the legionnaires sarcastically and bitterly nicknamed themselves Mari's mules among the people. But now the army could completely break away from its rear supply bases and move incredibly quickly through the forests. They would suddenly appear exactly where the frightened enemy least expected to see them in the coming month. During the bloodiest, most chaotic battle, the issue of food naturally took a back seat. But even here, the meticulous Romans demonstrated their trademark incredibly thoughtful and rational approach to the smallest details. Before the morning's intense drill, every soldier was guaranteed a very hearty and incredibly hot breakfast. Going into a brutal battle on a completely empty, growling stomach was considered the height of tactical stupidity and unprofessionalism. A well-fed, warm soldier holds a heavy shield much more firmly and is much less likely to panic at the sight of enemies. If a fierce battle unexpectedly dragged on for the entire long day, brave rearguard water carriers would step in. Special swift servants carefully made their way between the closed ranks, risking an accidental stray arrow to the forehead. They carried leather wineskins filled with cool water or sour water for the utterly exhausted warriors on the front lines. Dehydration killed soldiers much faster than any enemy sword in the incredibly hot climate of the East. A sip of life-saving sour water could easily decide the outcome of an entire fierce clash between 2 massive armies. It is incredibly interesting that the highest-ranking Roman commanders ate almost as simply as ordinary rank-and-file soldiers. The most famous generals deliberately ate plain, unsalted porridge in full view of their entire massive army. They pointedly drank incredibly cheap sour water and flatly refused any of the capital's exquisite delicacies while on the march. This phenomenally boosted the morale of the weary army to unimaginable and incredible heights before battle. Ordinary soldiers were ready to die gladly for a leader who shared all the terrible hardships on equal terms with them. After a successful, bloody battle, the army would very often happily seize the defeated enemy's rich provisions. But the suspicious Romans viewed any ready-made enemy food with incredibly intense and well-founded suspicion. Cunning barbarians could easily poison wells and entire granaries full of grain right before their hasty retreat. Experienced quartermasters inspected the captured supplies with incredible thoroughness before sending them into the soldiers' boiling cauldrons. This sensible paranoia saved more Roman lives than even the thickest and sturdiest wooden shields. Livestock captured from the enemy was immediately slaughtered so as not to waste precious fodder on it. After major landmark victories, the exhausted army would throw real, boisterous feasts with an enormous, unbelievable amount of roasted meat. But the very next day, all the soldiers obediently returned to their beloved standard: gray, bland porridge. A legionary's stomach had to run like a Swiss watch, without the slightest unexpected or unpleasant glitch. A sudden mass outbreak of intestinal upset among half the legion was a logistical catastrophe worse than any lost battle. This entire gigantic machine of uninterrupted supply depended exclusively on the harshest, blindest military discipline. Quartermasters punished a foolishly discarded piece of stale bread just as incredibly severely as they would desertion or cowardice. Food was a strategic state resource paid for with the blood of peasants and the emperor's vast gold reserves. The attitude towards soldiers' rations sometimes bordered on outright religious fanaticism at every single level of the army. And it was precisely this incredibly serious attitude that enabled tiny Rome to conquer virtually the entire known ancient world. 500,000 strong armed men ate breakfast, lunch, and dinner in perfect synchrony across the vast empire. From cold, rainy Scotland to scorching Egypt, cooking pots clattered merrily and heavy hand-cranked millstones turned monotonously. This daily tedious routine was no less a fearsome and important weapon than a sharp gladius or a flying pilum. Logistics alone does not win battles, but the absence of logistics is absolutely guaranteed to lose them spectacularly. And the ancient, intelligent Romans mastered the incredible art of large-scale supply logistics far better than anyone else in the world. War in ancient times always had an exceptionally pronounced and predictable seasonal character. In the cold winter, roads instantly turned into impassable slush, and incredibly dangerous, massive ice flows drifted down the rivers. Most of the world's armies simply quietly dispersed to their homes until the arrival of the next warm, sunny spring. The Romans looked at this strange custom and understood perfectly well that a truly great empire could not be built that way. They ruthlessly left their soldiers to winter right on the frontiers in incredibly cold and hostile forests. This bold decision created a completely new logistical problem of colossal and daunting proportions for the supply officers. A massive legion, trapped by deep snow in a wooden fort, was physically unable to procure food on its own in the surrounding area. Ordinary hunting in a frozen winter forest could never feed 5,000 incredibly hungry and healthy men. All hope for survival rested exclusively on those very massive stone warehouses called horia. If the chief quartermaster had miscalculated in the fall, by spring the frozen corpses would simply be quietly carried out of the camp. It was during the long winter that the ordinary soldier's ration changed drastically and unpleasantly, with a serious decline in quality. There were no fresh, crisp vegetables or juicy, sweet fruits at all throughout those many agonizing dark months. The only salvation from the dreadful scurvy was a supply of incredibly sour, cheap wine and that very same pungent garlic. The soldiers resignedly ate very hard, stale porridge with chunks of old, unbearably tough, salted lard. It sounds absolutely disgusting, but this reliable, high-calorie fuel allowed them to survive the most terrible, bitter frosts of wild Germany, Ordinary dry firewood for heating suddenly became as important a strategic resource as select wheat. The huge camp consumed hundreds and hundreds of cubic meters of wood every day just to keep the life-saving fires burning. Massive logging around the border fort went on non-stop from early morning until late into the dark evening. Huge trees were chopped and sawed down not only for life-sustaining warmth, but also for basic military security. The less dense forest growing around the wooden walls, the harder it was for cunning barbarians to approach the camp unnoticed. The daily logistics of gathering firewood took up almost as much productive time as regular military combat training. Soldiers strained themselves, harnessing themselves to creaking wooden carts instead of mules, to haul huge, raw, frozen logs out of the forest. My shoulders begin to ache quietly just from the vivid image of this dreadful, exhausting daily scene. The ancient Roman army was, in essence, also the largest armed logging company in the ancient world. They methodically destroyed entire dense ancient forests in Western Europe simply to avoid freezing in their tents during the winter. The large winter camps of the legions very often became incredible centers of attraction for local shrewd merchants. Noisy civilian settlements with veritable spontaneous markets sprang up astonishingly quickly around the closed military bases. Cunning, greedy merchants secretly brought in contraband fresh meat and strong alcohol at incredibly inflated prices. The freezing soldiers spent their hard-earned silver pay with great joy on these small gastronomic pleasures. Rome's economy literally and quite aggressively pulled the wild border regions out of the primitive Stone Age, but experienced, stern quartermasters hated these civilian merchants with every fiber of their strict Roman souls. Uncontrolled, suspicious food very often led to mass, dangerous poisonings in the cramped soldiers' barracks. A sick, weak soldier in the cold winter is a completely unnecessary mouth that only consumes precious firewood and porridge. Therefore, smart commanders often imposed incredibly strict quarantines on absolutely any food from the outside world. A healthy army on a boring, bland diet is far better than a sick, weak army with exotic delicacies. When deep snow finally and completely cut off the winter camp from the rest of the civilized world, the real psychological game began. Commanders deliberately and intentionally reduced the standard rations, even if the warehouses were packed to the brim with provisions. This was done not out of greed, but solely to create the useful illusion of a severe food shortage. Soldiers valued plain food much more when they knew for certain that it could suddenly run out at any moment. A person who is too hungry becomes furious, but a person who is slightly undernourished always remains incredibly obedient and alert. Modern experts in survival under extreme conditions call this cunning process physical stress management. Roman generals actively practiced this effective method long before psychology emerged as a true science. The endless winter was the hardest time of all, when discipline was forged not with an iron sword, but with a wooden spoon. The survival of the entire vast detachment depended on the ability of absolutely everyone to conserve the pitiful crumbs of remaining supplies. In such harsh conditions, no whiners or weaklings would simply have survived to see spring. The warm, long-awaited spring arrived at the smoke-stained camps like a true miracle and a salvation from monotonous madness. Suddenly, the snow-covered roads opened up, and the first supply convoys carrying normal, fresh food made their way to the distant front lines. The emaciated soldiers rejoiced in fresh, soft bread, far more than in the gold coins of their pay. The massive supply machine clanked back into full gear to prepare for the summer military campaign, and Rome prepared to deliver another deadly blow with strong, rested, and incredibly well-fed fighters. But what exactly happened when Rome's perfect and finely tuned logistical system suddenly suffered a critical failure? Ancient history knows frightening examples of when vast warehouses were completely emptied due to storms or brazen corruption. And then this invincible, disciplined military machine would quickly turn into a completely uncontrollable and incredibly brutal monster. An ordinary Roman soldier stoically endured the pain of grueling multi-day marches and even blows from a centurion's wooden staff. But he categorically and absolutely refused to endure an empty, growling stomach for any length of time. A hungry, angry legion was perhaps the most terrifying and destructive phenomenon in the entire ancient civilized world. The much-praised army discipline evaporated in just a few days of harsh, unjust, and complete starvation in the camp. Hungry soldiers began to mercilessly plunder the local civilian population without any orders from the command. Brave officers who tried to stop this spontaneous looting were simply beaten to death on the spot by their own subordinates. At such moments, the army turned into a veritable swarm of armed locusts, destroying its own rich provinces. Wise emperors knew this all too well and feared logistical blunders to the point of their knees trembling. A notorious incident is well known in which legions in forested Germany fiercely mutinied over a minor delay in provisions. They harshly demanded immediate payments and proper hot meals, threatening to march armed directly on the capital. Suppressing this dangerous mutiny cost the state treasury hundreds of thousands of gold and silver coins. It was far cheaper to deliver cheap wheat on time than to frantically placate very angry and experienced veterans. To address such crises urgently, special secret food reserve funds were established in advance in major cities. In the event of a sudden disruption in logistical supplies, the army had every right to requisition food from local mayors. Intimidated civilian officials were required to immediately hand over all supplies under the terrible threat of certain execution. None of the generals cared in the least that ordinary civilians would be left completely without bread for the entire long winter. The state always cold-bloodedly prioritized its army because without it, the entire empire would vanish very quickly. Thieving logistics officers who failed to deliver vital supplies rarely lived to face a fair trial in the distant capital. Very often, they were simply thrown to the enraged, starving soldiers to be savagely torn apart right in the middle of the camp square. It sounds incredibly cruel and barbaric, but it worked far better than any modern, strict quality control department. Fully aware of such grim prospects, the ancient quartermaster would extract grain from the ground at absolutely any cost. Corruption in military logistics was punished much more swiftly and severely than even outright treason. Sometimes commanding generals had to make radical and unpopular decisions to quickly save their starving army. The great Julius Caesar once found himself in cold Gaul with absolutely no supplies, facing a massive enemy army. He firmly ordered that some of the valuable pack animals be slaughtered to feed the exhausted men hot-roasted meat. The soldiers correctly interpreted this as the most extreme, desperate measure and a clear signal of an incredibly brutal battle to come. They literally tore the massive Gauls to pieces just to get to their well-stocked granaries as quickly as possible. This psychological principle of desperation was very often used deliberately by experienced commanders right before the most intense battle. Remember, we discussed in detail the artificial creation of shortages in snow-covered winter camps to maintain strict discipline. Before a dangerous assault on a wealthy enemy city, soldiers might have had their evening meal deliberately and severely delayed. An incredibly angry and very hungry legionnaire storms high walls with far greater vigor than a lazy, well-fed man. Modern sports coaches use artificial anger, while the ancient Romans ingeniously used nothing more than an empty stomach. But abusing such dangerous psychological tricks was incredibly deadly and dangerous, even for the most cunning commander. The fine line between useful combat fury and an uncontrollable soldier's mutiny is incredibly thin and practically invisible. A very clever general would always point out to his weary soldiers the fully loaded supply wagons standing behind the ranks. The ordinary men knew for certain that after very hard, bloody work, a warm, hearty meal awaited them. This incredibly simple motivation worked flawlessly for nearly 5 turbulent centuries. In the end, the great Rome fell not at all because of a sudden weakness in its vaunted steel legions. The vast empire collapsed with a crash when its stunning global food logistics machine broke down irrevocably. The barbarians' conquest of breadbasket Egypt in warm North Africa permanently cut off vital supplies of cheap grain. A massive fleet quietly rotted away in abandoned ports, and gigantic transshipment hubs were utterly and hopelessly emptied. Without an incredible amount of food, the world's most invincible army simply faded quietly into the mists of history. Heavy armor rusted, sharp swords dulled, and smooth stone roads grew thick with tall green grass. Only those incredibly massive warehouse buildings, made of very thick and durable cold stone, survived. Today, cheerful tourists wander through them, completely unaware of the true great significance of these dull ruins. They gaze boredly at the gray stones and see only old, empty, tall walls that no one needs. But in reality, this is the majestic tomb of the greatest and most ingenious logistical empire of our distant past. To truly grasp the true greatness of the Roman logistics system, look at absolutely any modern protracted war. When the massive modern US Army triumphantly entered Iraq, they suddenly faced truly colossal supply problems. And this despite having transport jets, huge trucks, and instant, reliable, encrypted satellite communications. Their long convoys regularly got stuck in deep sand and were subjected to sudden, deadly attacks from cunning ambushes. Drinking water and hot meals very often simply did not reach the advancing frontline units in time. Now just remember that the ancient Romans did exactly the same thing nearly 2,000 years ago. They fed 500,000 people daily without a hitch, using only creaking carts, sailboats, and sheer muscle power. Their incredible distributed system operated entirely without computers, radios, or powerful internal combustion engines. It was an absolute and unqualified triumph of human intellect over the harsh, wild nature and vast distances. In this story, it wasn't blind bravery that won the day, but tedious bookkeeping and cold stone warehouses filled with plain porridge.